start.
You're on mute, Mike.
Okay. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I think we'll get right to it. I think the fact that, at least for Ginta, this is by far the largest audience we've ever had on any webinar. It shows, obviously, the terrific amount of interest and concern that there is, certainly here in the United States, about what has happened in Israel since the tragic days of Saturday. And I think, I'm sure I speak for everybody here in the U.S., at least on this webinar, and certainly in our wider Ginza universe, when I at least expressed to the Israelis, the three Israeli panelists, that we're all very, obviously very upset and very sorry for this awful event that has happened, and the tremendous loss of life in Israel, the wounded. General Aish, General Amidjor, Vakasha. Okay, we hear you speaking. Please mute if you're not going to speak on the camera. Let's get to it. We have, I'm sure many of you, and I appreciate you all joining us, are following this extremely closely, following up online on the newspapers, on Twitter, etc. What is going on? So I do want to start. We have an excellent group of panelists. We have General Yaakov Aish, who's the Senior Vice President Ginza for Israel, our operations in Israel. He's the former defense attaché, Israeli defense attaché in Washington, and he's also the former J3 in the IDF, the former head of the operations directorate of the IDF. We also have General Norkin, who is the previous Air Force commander, the Israeli Air Force commander, also the former head of strategic, the J5 in the IDF, and he's also a distinguished fellow with Ginza. And we also have our third retired IDF general, General Yaakov Amidjor, who's also a distinguished fellow with Ginza for a long time, former national security advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and former head of the Research and Analysis Division in Military Intelligence in Israel. And finally, we have John Hanna, the Randy and Charles Wax Senior Fellow here at Ginza. His last government job was National Security Advisor to Vice President Cheney, but he also one of the leading foreign policy experts in Washington. So thank you all very much. I want to address both operational, what's going on the ground, to help frame it for our audience. And I will add, we have a number of retired American generals that have tuned in for this, in addition to supporters and journalists and so on. But I want to deal with operational issues and strategic issues. Let me first deal with a few, get an update on the operational side. I'm going to turn to you, General Norkin, first, and then General Aish, and then I'll go to General Amidjor. But General Norkin, you were the commander for 5 years of the Israeli Air Force until about 1.5 years ago. Right now, as Israel has been calling up, according to reports, over 300,000 reservists, it seems like the Air Force is taking the lead right now in Israeli military actions in Gaza. Maybe you could explain right now, what is the role of the Air Force? What are they trying to achieve in Gaza? As it seems like, and we'll get to this, but as many assume, based on the call-up of all these hundreds of thousands of reservists, that Israel is going to do some sort of ground incursion into Gaza. What is the Air Force trying to do right now, the last few days, and what do you see them doing in the next few days?
Well, thank you, Mike, and hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here. First of all, since yesterday, 6:30 in the morning a.m., the Air Force act in three main vectors. I'm sure that you all know that in Israel, the Air Force is commanding the air defense systems. So, first of all, from the first moment, our Iron Dome systems and units defend the population from Tel Aviv to the south. All those areas were under attack. Thousands of rockets. In the first half day, they launched over 3,000 rockets to the Israeli cities and villages. And we defend those areas. And it's a major vector for the Air Force, especially in such an event that started with no intelligence. And we all were surprised. And this is something that I'm sure that we are going to discuss it for the next 10, 20 years about the intelligence issues. But now this is the first vector. The second one is that the Israeli Air Force Special Forces immediately get to those areas by helicopters and start to fight against the Hamas terrorists in more than one areas. Especially, they try to bring back the option to control the military areas, and later on, after 6 or 7 hours, many other troops joined to those special forces, and unfortunately, until now, they are still fighting to push out all those terrorists. We already killed by our special forces 100 of them, hundreds of terrorists that penetrate from Gaza. But as you know, we lost more than 800 citizens and soldiers in this terror attack. The third vector is what the Air Force is doing inside Gaza, and now it's become the major vector. And by the air campaign, which you know that very well, that the Israel Air Force got a very good and high capabilities to fight against terror, especially in urban territories. And we are together with the IDF intelligence and the South Command, we are destroying all the Hamas headquarters, camps, underground facilities, launchers, all the military capabilities in Gaza. This is the main mission for the Air Force. Of course, we do it under the international, let's say, law and are under values, because we are not attacking civilians. So we are announcing before, and we alert them to move from those neighborhoods and streets, and then we attack. Until now, we attack more than 1,200 targets in less than 24 hours. So those three vectors are the main vectors for the Air Force. And the third, and maybe I might mention that we are looking to our North Front, and the Air Force, like the North Command and many others, we prepared ourselves to avoid any activities from the north border. This is a general, let's say, brief about what the Air Force is doing now.
Let me ask you one, and I know we're going to have a lot of questions, and let me just state, I should have said it in my introduction remarks, I know everyone listening has a lot of questions, and I'm sure many of you do, your panelists, about how this could have happened and so on. I recognize that this is a time in Israel for bringing together, where folks are focused on the operation in hand. and trying to minimize any more Israeli loss of life. And even politicians have set aside their differences and have talked about a unity government. So we'll try our best not to dwell too much on that, as much as we all want to know answers to that. But let me ask you, General Norkin, I'm glad you brought up the air defense. I had two questions on that, and I think it's important for everyone to understand, as you point out, that the Air Force is in charge of that. How do you see that there's more? It seems like that these rockets from Gaza are having more impact. There was just some attacks in Jerusalem today. We've seen in Tel Aviv, obviously in the south. How do you see that? It looks like there are more rockets that seem to be getting through, or is that then it has in other interactions with Gaza, or is that an incorrect statement on my part?
Well, our goal is to achieve 85%, and now we are above 90. So even if just 5% of those rockets penetrate the air defense systems, from time to time you see one or two rockets, unfortunately, they hit some of our citizens' houses or other targets. And if our citizens will keep the home front command orders and be under shelter, like I did in the last day more than 5 times, it's a very good solution. And they launch thousands of rockets, and they achieve almost nothing.
Yeah. One last thing, and then I'll turn to General Eich. But General Norkin, when you were talking about Gaza, could you does Hamas have what do you see their anti-aircraft capabilities that Hamas has for all those sorties?
They got some, let's say, manpads, and they try to launch toward our helicopters. The main threat is for the helicopters. They launched some of them, and we got our systems, and we got our, let's say, the way that we are flying without going into deep details. So the helicopters are under threat, but the combat fleet is, the threat is very minimal, so it's not a big issue. It's a different story above Lebanon. So Lebanon is completely different story. They got air defense systems, and we might talk about it in another opportunity.
Okay, thank you. All right, General Eich, I know you were head of all the operations director at the IDF, but you're fundamentally a tank man, if that is correct. Maybe you could explain what you see, what is happening with the call up of the reserves, and it seems extremely extensive, and in Israel, and how you see what some of the ground forces have already been doing already, and what you see they might be starting to do in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Mike. Let me start with the broader picture. We were surprised by a full-scale invasion by Hamas October 7th. And in that sense, the whole system may have collapsed, and we can see the results. 20 points along the fence of the Gaza border, they succeeded to penetrate into the area of Israel, to attack villages, kibbutzim, plus military bases. We have at the moment around 800 casualties, and to my opinion, the number is growing. I think we are going to reach something like 1,000. And for us, basically, it's the Israeli 9/11. When you are thinking in terms of a comparison to the US population, 1,000 people that were killed in the last 3 days compared to the US, it's around 30,000 in American numbers. So in that sense, the missions that were declared to the military immediately after the government have declared war on Hamas, and it's wartime now, was first to clear up the area near the border from those who invaded Israel, and to restore security. And the second phase, as Norkin have described it, is an offensive. Now, the offensive is an air offensive, and the future will say what will be the next steps. For that measure, and I'm going to your question, the IDF is preparing itself not only in terms of readiness to the south, but also to the north. And for that sense, reserve divisions, logistics, intelligence, air defense capabilities, Air Force, and many other elements within the IDF were called. Right now, we are talking about a number of 300,000 troops and commanders, around 4 or 5 reserve divisions, as an addition to the regular divisions and many other forces as well. The point here is not only to look at the southern sector and the readiness for missions at that sector, but also to the north. And when I'm saying to the north, we already have seen today and yesterday some incidents along the border with Lebanon, but we have to be ready for other sectors as well. So the key word right now is a multi-front war that might escalate or develop in the next few days. What will be the exact defined strategic goal for this war? We should wait and see. It should be defined by the Israeli government and later on translated by the IDF general staff into military operation.
Okay, thank you, General Eich. General Amidror, let me ask you, I'd like to get your sense of, if you could address, to complement what General Eich just said, how do you see the big picture right now? What just happened? And then I want to ask you some follow-up specific questions.
The picture is that the situation is that the government gave a clear order, clear target to the military. It's to destroy the military capability of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It's very concrete, very clear, and now, as General Eich said, it should be translated into military operation with all the details. The mission of the military forces today was to finish, to clean inside Israel all the areas so the terrorists will not be behind the forces which stay on the line. It took much more than was expected, and there are still 1 or 2 points in which it was not finished, but I believe that within the night everything will be clean. It does say that they will not try to infiltrate in later on, but at least what was there will be clean. We speak here about around 500 terrorists which had been killed by the IDF inside Israel. This is around the number of the terrorists which had been killed inside. The minute that will be cleaned, the focus of the IDF, after a little bit of time of organization, will be how to implement the order of the government. There will be at least 2 separate stages. One is overlapping with the cleaning of the area. It's the Air Force, as General Norkin described, and this is his profession. He will do it much better than me. The list of targets which had been in the system are now becoming part of the mission of the Air Force, and new targets are coming in because of the dynamic of the battlefield. But most of them are targets which were known before the operation. Because it is a war and not an operation that after a few days we are going back to square one, it is something which will make a different situation in the Gaza Strip, as was declared. Many restrictions which had been taken by the IDF in the previous rounds were pushed away, and the IDF has much more flexibility in the operation. It's including the use of the Air Force and all the other means which might be used in the future. So this is the stage 2. It's using the targeting system to destroy whatever can be destroyed from the air, by artillery and so on and so forth, but mainly by the Air Force. The second stage that will come after, I don't know, a few days or weeks, in which we will destroy whatever we know about and what can be exposed by the intelligence system during this period. The decision will be in the hands of the decision makers based on the suggestions will be brought to the table by the military guys. Should Israel invade with ground forces the Gaza Strip? The question will be what is needed to destroy the Hamas and Islamic Jihad capabilities. If the professionals, the generals, will come to the decision makers saying, guys, we did what we can from the air. Now we need to enter to destroy these parts which remain and to kill as many as possible members of Hamas. I think if my recommendation will be to let the ground forces to go in and to go after the Hamas operatives and the Hamas infrastructure to destroy everything and to kill everyone and to make Hamas an organization without military capability. It will take weeks, not 1, not 2, not 3, much more, to clean the Gaza Strip. And then it will be a new situation because, first of all, it will be clear to everyone in the Middle East that there are some red lines. If crossed by our enemies, we are determined to destroy to ashes the other side. And it is a very clear message that should be around the Middle East. Second, that if will be needed, we will use ground forces and sacrifice whatever is needed to destroy the other side. And then it will be Israeli policy not to let Hamas to rebuild its military capability, meaning to continue to use the Air Force and other capabilities that we have to destroy every attempt of Hamas to rebuild its military capability. I think that this is very important, 3 elements that should be understood around the Middle East. Now it's not just about Gaza. Gaza should be the symbol of the abilities of Israel to react, and if will be a need to initiate a war that afterwards the other side does not exist as a military force. What happened in those first 24 hours is really crime against humanity. They killed children, women, old people, families in their house. They killed 300 young guys and ladies which were in a music festival not far from the border. 300 of them in the middle of, at the end of a musical festival. Something that we cannot allow to happen. The numbers which had been brought about 9/11. After 9/11, the Americans went to Bora Bora, the other side of the world, because you didn't know who sent these guys. We know who sent them, and they are 10 kilometers from the border, and we will run after them, not to bring them to justice, but to bring justice to them. And if for that we need another 2 months, we will do it another 2 months. Here, the importance of the understanding of the Americans, why it is crucial, not only because of Gaza, because that will make the Middle East a different one in which enemies will know that they cannot be aggressive And if they are aggressive, they will pay. So for the stability of the Middle East in the future, America should support Israel and help Israel to get enough time to implement what is needed to destroy Hamas. And I'm not optimistic about it. It is not a question of 2 or 3 weeks. It is more question of 2 or 3 months. But it should be done. Otherwise, everyone in the Middle East understand that the combination between Israel and America is weak, and everyone can do whatever he wants. This is for the benefit of Israel, but it's the interest of the United States of America that it will be ended very clear that those who are fighting against the axis of Israel and America will not be alive. They will be dead, and their capabilities that will be destroyed. I think it's very important to understand, and here Hamas crossed all the red lines of human rules. It is more like, wars in the past in which you enter to apartments of civilian families and keep all the family. Why? What happened? Anyhow, this is the situation on the ground. The very important decision was taken. The Prime Minister declared that this is a war, not operation. Many restrictions will be pushed away. We are in the second stage, almost the end of the first one, cleaning the area from the terrorists which succeeded to infiltrate into Israel, to invade Israel. And the Air Force, as was described by General Norkin, is very, very busy. And within a week, 10 days, the decision should be taken if we continue with ground forces or not. General,
I have a number of follow-up questions for what you just said, and I appreciate all your comments. And I think I'm sure everybody who's listening feels exactly the same way. Anyone who is seeing any of these videos, who have read some of certainly what we read, certainly on Twitter and online, killing kids in front of parents, killing parents in front of kids. It's just incomprehensible. And how they treat live or dead Israelis when they bring them back to Gaza. It's just I think it shocks even those many who have a very low opinion of Hamas, but how even the people are reacting to see sweets being handed out in London or Berlin or elsewhere by, I assume, I don't know if just Arabs or Palestinians in particular, for what they see as a victory is just, I think, disgusting. And
I think that there is a lesson from that your description. At the end, terror organization is terror organization is terror organization. And all our, including mine, explanation that the organization, after getting some responsibilities, is more responsible, and he might be more moderate because they want the better life for the people, and so on and so forth. It didn't work. At the end of the day, terror organization, it's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Hezbollah, it's Islamic Jihad, it is Hamas. All of them are the same. At the end of the day, there are terror organizations that should be destroyed and smashed by those who do not want to live in a world in which terror organizations can walk freely. And that was our biggest mistake, including myself personally. And we should react very forcefully to make clear to every terror organization in the Middle East that we will not make the same mistake again.
I want to turn to John to talk about pick up on what you just said about America, but I know General Norkin had a point he wanted to say first, and then I'll turn to John. General Norkin, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add two main issues to General Amidor, which did a very professional briefing. For the audience, you should know that we got no strategic depth. So the distance between the border and those villages and cities is less than 3 kilometers. And if we want those tens of thousands of citizens to move back to their houses, and if we want that this part of Israel will flourish and will be, let's say, a successful area in our nation, we must achieve what General Amidor mentioned, that in Gaza there will be no military threat, because it's not the other side of the globus. It's 5 kilometers. And people that lost their families won't move back to their villages without this, let's say, target or goal. Second, General Amidor mentioned that Gaza is a symbol for the Middle East neighborhood. And I think that this is something that our American friend should know, that it's a campaign. It's part of campaign. Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Not from the tactical point of view, from the, let's say, from the vision level. So the reason that I'm happy to learn that the Americans are going to be here with a quite large force and to support Israel, it's a message for all the others that try to achieve strategic targets from this brutal attack.
Hey, John, let me turn to you. I appreciate your patience. But based on what General Norkin just said and General Amidor brought up the U.S. response, obviously there's been criticism of President Biden. I've seen it on Twitter a lot, certainly by Republicans. And, you know, he was accommodating on Iran, the recent ransom payment of $6 billion, or what people term that, effectively of unfreezing of Iranian funds of $6 billion to get the hostages or the wrongly imprisoned Americans out of Iran. The non-enforcement of sanctions under the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration, where Iran has reaped tens of billions of dollars in oil revenue, a lot of it from China. You know, than they were, I think in 2020, Iranian oil revenue, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, was $7.9 billion. I think last year was $54 billion, according to the DOE, and it's estimated this year will be about $46 billion. So that's a huge jump. And the accumulation over 3 years, it's a lot of oil revenue. But on the other hand, President Biden Saturday said there's going to be rock solid, unwavering support of Israel. Secretary of Defense Austin said we are going to give Israel what it needs. There's been total support by this administration for Israel. Obviously, you have some dissidents on the far left of the Democratic Party, but it's been pretty universal, I would say, across the political spectrum. But how do you assess the U.S. response, and what do you think the limits of that response are going to be?
Yeah, well, Mike, thank you. Listen, I think there's lots to criticize about how we got to this point, both in terms of the American policy and clearly in terms of Israeli policy. But I think now is a day for us all to look forward on how we get done the kind of mission that General Amidor just described. And I think, if anything, at least for the moment, the saving grace of what this horror that we saw transpire on Saturday is that it shows how resilient and unified Israeli society is going to be to smash this threat. And I think it's re-underscored for Americans how much our fate and our interests are intertwined with Israel. And I think you saw that outpouring of support from both the administration and the Congress on Saturday was a sign of that. And I think that's incredibly important. I think, as Amidor says, for the United States, the question is, how long can you sustain it? Because what Israel needs now more than anything is it obviously needs American moral support, but it is going to need diplomatic cover, not just for 2 weeks until the pictures on the TV of the war and carnage that is going to result from what Hamas did on Saturday, and that they are solely responsible for. It's got to last longer than a couple of weeks. This is going to be at least a couple of months. And God forbid there's some decision by Hezbollah to get involved in this and the Iranians to deepen their involvement. It could last even much longer than that. So I think the United States needs to get ready for a very, very long campaign in which our support of Israel, particularly internationally at the United Nations, is going to be absolutely critical. And then I think, obviously, for whatever Israel is going to need in terms of resupply is going to be essential. I'll be very interested to hear what our generals have to say about what are their key needs from the United States. But certainly resupply, the air defense capability, the PGM capabilities. At some point in time, Israel is going to need much more of those. I think the American stockpile in Israel, which has got several $1 million worth of equipment now. I don't know how much of it is useful to the IDF in terms of the operation to come. But we've got to make sure that all of that is available to Israel. And then we've got to be thinking right now about how do we resupply that arsenal that we have stockpiled in Israel so that the IDF has everything it needs. That's obviously been an issue that Jinsa has been talking about for a very long time. A lot of that stockpile has been drawn down by the needs of the Ukrainian military. We've got to make sure it's fully loaded up and that Israel is prepared for the long term. And then I think what General Norkin just said about what is America able to provide here in terms of added deterrence, in terms of moving our forces closer to Israel, closer to Lebanon, sending those very direct diplomatic messages that President Biden hinted at on Saturday about nobody else outside, that meaning the Iranians and Hezbollah seeking to take advantage of this in any way, shape, or form. We need that American deterrent message to those outside actors, both in terms of the diplomatic signaling, but as well in terms of American military capabilities that will be ready to act against anybody trying to take strategic advantage of this. I do worry about our forces in Iraq. We've already seen lots of statements by the Iraqi militias, by Muqtada al-Sadr in particular, saying that they're prepared to get into this against the United States if the United States intervenes. I'm thinking about those American hostages that could be inside of Gaza now, and how does the American military work with Israel to try and make sure those people are freed? And then America has to be deeply involved in the region. The initial regional responses here were, I would say, on the whole, extremely disappointing. There's been some evolution in the last few days, particularly from the UAE, to finally come out openly and condemn Hamas and the killing of innocent, the slaughtering of innocent civilians. We need much more of that. We should set a very high bar for our Arab friends. I know they're under pressure because of their streets' continued devotion to the Palestinian cause, but this is not anything that will help the Palestinian cause. What happened on Saturday, it will set it back a generation for sure, and the Palestinian people themselves will pay the highest price for what happened, what Hamas, the atrocities they committed on Saturday. So I think, particularly with a state like Qatar that came out unbelievably in support of Hamas, putting all the blame on Israel. This is a non-NATO American ally in the Middle East coming in full force in support of Hamas. They need this be put on warning that if they have the greatest influence with Hamas at this point in time, they need to exercise it now to get as many of those hostages out of Gaza as possible, unhurt and unharmed, or else there will be consequences to pay in terms of America's relationship with Qatar.
Yeah. Look, I'm glad you brought up. Let's pick up, and I'll come back about the region. I want to talk about the Saudi-Israel normalization. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about. Let me talk about the hostage issue, and maybe I'll turn to General Aish first. But what do you think Israeli military planners, how they're trying to think this through? They couldn't get Gilad Shalit out when it was won. Now you have Israeli hostages. Now you have reportedly over 100. A number of also American citizens. You have older people, kids, soldiers, whatever. And meanwhile, you have the Air Force is hitting Gaza hard, but you hope that the hostages stay alive. How do you both hit Hamas while also trying to make sure that the hostages stay alive and are eventually released? Obviously, like John mentioned, obviously should work diplomatically, make clear to Iran and Qatar how important it is that these hostages are unharmed. But first, on the military side, how do you think they're trying to pursue both?
Well, as Amidor described, the war strategic goal, as it was defined, was first of all to restore security outside of Gaza, and then the offense, as the Nokim have described, is according to our moral compass. We are not attacking without knowing what we are attacking. And when you are adding on it the fact that we have hostages over there that might be used as a human shield, it is taken in consideration. I assume I don't have to be there, but if we are taking consideration uninvolved casualties, the other side definitely will take in consideration such a thing. Rest, vis-a-vis the planning is for me to describe. It is part of the whole campaign, part of this war, but it's only a part from that. The main mission right now is to destroy Hamas capabilities and restore security and deterrence for the next years to come in the region. And this is the context. Hostages are only one dimension, and that's how all the pain we should address.
General Merchant, would you obviously the Air Force under your command and your predecessors, your successors, are really excelled in pinpoint attacks. How do you think the Air Force command now is thinking about this?
You know, we learned from the history in the 73 war, we attacked the Syrian Joint Staff Headquarters, and the Syrian military jail was at the basement. And all our pilots were there. At that time we didn't know that. So there is no situation like Entebbe. We don't know where are people. They are all over Gaza. So we should act, as Amidor mentioned, against all the military capabilities. And in one hand, in the other hand, we need to bring back our people. First of all, and this might be in a very short time, the old ones, the old citizens, the children, the women, those groups need to be back in Israel in a week or two. I understand that the negotiation about the soldiers might take time, but it's a different story. And I think that it's not part of my responsibility, but we should act in two different and parallel vectors between the military and the citizen hostages.
General Amidor, I'd like to bring you back in on this.
First of all, the decision here is not to negotiate with Hamas. We are not negotiating. All the news about the Egyptians, the plight, we don't negotiate. And the strict decision not to negotiate. in a way, the fact that they are holding the hostages in Gaza might be relevant very much in the future, because we need time and they will not give up, and that will give us the time. Because I don't see them giving up the greatest success of the operation from their point of view. And we will have to be very determined and not to blink and not to give anything for something, but to force them to understand that they are paying every day and every hour because they are holding our people. How long it will take, I don't know. Many years ago, and I remember the days in Lebanon during which I wrote a paper called, with Gabi Ashkenazi, called Hannibal Process or Hannibal Protocol, saying that if Hezbollah is taking one of our soldiers, you do not allow to kill the soldier, but you have to take risks to save him, risk him to save him. And this is the situation of today. We are not going to stop the bombing of the Air Force because we don't know where the hostages are. If we know about somewhere that they are deep in the ground, and probably we will not bomb this place. But other than that, we are not taking into account the fact that there are 120 Israelis in Gaza, I don't know the exact number, and we will continue the operation like they are not there. And yes, it is very problematic, but there is no any other way to deal with the problem but to continue the operation without taking into account the fact that somewhere in Gaza or in some places in Gaza, there are Israelis probably under the ground. So it's morally a huge problem, but at the end, the decision was taken. We will continue to bomb Gaza without taking into account that, yes, there are 120 Israelis there.
I have a couple more questions. I want to make sure we get to how the U.S. could help or how Americans could help, because I know a lot of people are wondering that. But General Amidjor, just on this, where do you think the levers are? Is it Qatar, Iran, in terms of pressuring Hamas, or is it just dealing directly with Hamas? When I mean dealing, not negotiating, but the way Israel is dealing with Hamas right now, what do you think the pressure points are to try to get these hostages out?
At the moment, no one has any leverage on Hamas. Hamas is in euphoric situation. They succeeded to make the biggest operation against Israel since Yom Kippur War. The euphoria is making them in a situation in which they don't take into account anyone. It was a huge success, no question. At the end, I think that only the Egyptians might have some leverages on Hamas, but not today, not in the next 10 days, and not maybe in the next few weeks. We have to block the Gaza Strip, to prevent any attempt to bring in any help or something. They have to suffer inside and to understand that there is a price for the fact that they are holding our people. And we have to destroy everything which is identified with Hamas, even remotely identified with Hamas. Everything should be destroyed. And only if and when, and it's big if, it's not promised that it will happen, but only if Hamas feels that he is losing ground, losing everything, he will be ready to negotiate or to give up the hostages. It will be a very long process, very hard, because this is the only benefit that they have today. The numbers which I just saw that we killed 1,000 members of Hamas inside Israel along the border. It's a huge number for such an organization. And the number inside, I don't know. No one knows. They say it's around 500. and not all of them Hamas members, and some of them civilians. But it's big numbers for the Gaza Strip, but only if they feel, and it will not going to be easy, that the organization, the members of the organization, that Hamas members are suffering because of the situation, they might consider something which we can meet somewhere.
Let me ask you one follow-up, and then I'll turn about the U.S. help. General Amidjor, we've talked many times, both publicly on Zooms and then privately, about this issue, about what to do in Gaza. And obviously, Israel has fought a number of wars, basically short operations relatively, except for one with Hamas. Israel's had many opportunities to uproot Hamas, but obviously there have been a number of considerations not to, especially in recent years. The bigger focus is the north. Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets, the Iranian threat. You don't want to control. If you got rid of Hamas, if you uprooted them, who's going to take over? Israel doesn't really want to occupy and control Gaza. Obviously, the Egyptians don't either. I mean, these are part of the considerations before, but given today, and given what you just said repeatedly of the objectives now about destroying the military capability of Hamas, what do you see as the day after, as you always like to talk about?
The day after will be very problematic for the Palestinians, and they will have to make decisions. We are all speak about Gaza like the Palestinians do not have any responsibility. We will decide if it's good or bad or whatever. No, the Palestinians, the day came 2 days ago, that the Palestinians will have to make a decision what they want. In this situation of today, our job and our responsibility is to destroy Hamas as a military organization. Their job is to decide what they want in Gaza afterwards. Our job will be to make sure that nothing like that will emerge again. Nothing will be rebuilt in Gaza when it is related to military. Their job will be to decide what regime they want. And if they decide that they want Hamas, or Hamas will be too strong to be ignored by the Palestinians there in Gaza, they will suffer. They will suffer from everything, because it's the end of the day in which we are helping the Palestinians to build the Gaza. I was between those Israelis who preached to help Hamas to promote the standard of living, to let the Palestinians to walk in Israel and so on and so forth. That was a huge illusion and big mistake. And we are not going to make this mistake again. And the problem is not ours, it's the Palestinians' problem.
Yeah, okay. I mean, the few minutes we have remaining, I'd like to ask all of you about how you see, and I'll start with the Israelis and then John, how the U.S. could help. And I'll mention, just to give you an idea.
Because if I may, because that something begins in the north. There was 2 or 3 attempts to infiltrate. There was a clash between our forces, including helicopters and those who infiltrated to Israel. We have some wounded soldiers in the clashes. One of them is severely wounded. We attack few targets inside Lebanon, very close to the border from which they came. And just now, Hezbollah declared that he will retaliate. It might be nothing, because up till now, Hezbollah was very cautious. But here, it's it's a challenge to Nasrallah, because he promised that if someone will attack someone inside something or someone inside Lebanon, he will retaliate in the way that he blah 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 blah. Now the ball is in his court. He will have to make a decision. And if the decision will be to attack targets inside Israel, that might be the first steps towards a big operation in Lebanon. The meaning of that is very, very problematic from our point of view. We will have to accelerate the whole operation in Gaza to finish it as early as possible, and the suffering in Gaza will increasingly will be shown, because we will not have time to elaborate and to be too precise. and to move all our capabilities into Lebanon. And this is devastating war, which will be involved thousands and thousands of rockets and so on and so forth. But if that happens, it will change the whole balance of power in the Middle East. So we will have to be very cautious to look at what's happening now in the north. If this is going to be closed between the two sides, nothing happened, or it is going to be the first step of a big war in Lebanon. And both options are there.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, and I think we'll need to deal with that in greater depth at our next webinar, which I expect to be extremely soon, General. But you're right. I mean, the North is a powder keg, and obviously extremely important. Let me turn to General Norkin, and General Ice will get back about. I want to talk about the U.S. more we could help. General Norkin, you and I have spoken many times over the years, for instance, about precision-guided munitions. Obviously, they need Iron Dome or interceptors. Israel needs, as John Hanna pointed out, this is Jinsa's race since 2018 about replenishing the U.S. stockpile, which in the Pentagon is referred to as Warsaw I. We've been talking about it. We've been writing about it. My colleague Blaise Mishtal and I had an op-ed early this year at the Wall Street Journal. After the U.S. sent more, let's say, artillery pieces to Ukraine, it seemed to empty it out even more. But as far as we understand, it hasn't been replenished since the Bush administration. We've talked to the Trump administration, talked to the Biden administration, talked to members of Congress. So far, that hasn't been replenished yet. But you obviously, whether it's stockpiled or you just need them now transferred, what do you think would be useful for the U.S. to do from your perspective to help now?
Well, that's I think that there is two stages, short time and long time. For the long time, all the things that we already talked about and Jinsa already published many times, there is no change on those, let's say, strategic lists. And as I mentioned, always, if Israel is got better capabilities, the Middle East might be more stable. But now, for the short time, ammunition is the high priority, mainly JDAMs and SDBs, because by that we can achieve more and we can have less collateral damage. It's important for both targets.
The types of precision-guided munitions.
Yeah, those precision-guided ammunition, as you mentioned. The Iron Dome capabilities, of course, but it might take more time. So for the short time, the second one is the intelligence capabilities that can support Israel in other fronts than Gaza. The American intelligence capabilities can support the Israeli intelligence immediately, and I think that this is second on the list. And there are some platforms that we can speak about that can support us mainly while we are fighting terrorists, like attack helicopters and other, but this is not the first priority. So as I mentioned, ammunition, precision-guided bombs, this is the first one.
Okay. General Ice, let me ask you also to discuss about
if I may before General Ice, I have another Zoom now. I'm really sorry. I'm speaking in Zooms from London to Buenos Aires the whole day. So I'm apologizing, but I have another Zoom exactly now. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that we will meet in another cases.
Yes, we will very soon. Thank you, General Hamid.
Thank you. I really apologize.
We'll conclude in just a couple of minutes, but General Aish, let me ask you, and I'm going to ask you something very basic, because I've gotten already a couple of people have raised this to me this morning. I got a couple of texts, for instance, from Israel that says Israel needs protective vests. That's right.
Let me refer to it.
I'll even ask you. I bring it up because even one of our supporters who I saw this morning said he was asked to give money to this. People are asking to give money. I think it actually, I know it seems pretty basic, but I think it'd be good to address that explicitly.
I'll address it. As someone who was the Army Chief of Staff during the 2006 war, let me address it and explain something. I spoke already about the reservists. We called the reserve unit. And instead of 100%, 160% arrived to the bases. The supply that we have, the equipment that we have, the gear that we have is for a bit more than 100%, okay? So the issue is usually with all the others that you are going to send back home. So I'm saying it after clarifying it yesterday night with my colleagues within the IDF. There is no need for such an equipment. I know it's popular. I know people tend to do whatever they can to help, but it's irrelevant. What is really relevant, it was discussed between you and General Norkin, is the strategic capabilities that Israel have to be provided with in order to be ready for a full-scale war, not only in Gaza, but in the other fronts. And for that sense, besides guided munitions, and for that sense, the ability to replenish Iron Dome and the other layers, by the way. It's not only Iron Dome. It's Iron Dome and some other layers that we have without mentioning them. And this is the key issue. And it has two dimensions. One is the strategic support to Israel and the strategic readiness for the multi-front war that might be imminent in a matter of days. And the second is the tactical immediate support that is highly relevant. On that, I would add what you have mentioned, Mike, is the Warsaw Eye. Bear in mind that that stockpile, once the US is replenishing it, is not an Israeli stockpile. Right. It's a US stockpile that could be held in Israel. But the ability to use it is under the authority of the US. So with that said, I would push aside, all the small issues that people tend to ask that, this gear or that. We, as someone who dealt with it, we have replenished it in the last decades, and we have whatever we need.
Okay. What about one last thing, and I'll tell John, and then we'll conclude. For General Eicher, General Norkin, what about air defense capabilities? Does Israel need any assistance, you think, from the United States in the region?
Well, I think that what I learned from the, let's say, the media, that the American forces is going to send to this region. It's part of our air defense capabilities. If there is any other fronts that might threat Israel, like the North one or any threat from Iran. So if the American forces and the American government will decide to bring those assets to our region, it's a very good message for the short future.
All right, John, we've already gone past our time by a few minutes. So, and I did want to actually address the Saudi normalization issue. Would you want to address how the U.S. could help, you think, beyond what you said, or do you want to just, at least for a couple of minutes, just address the Saudi normalization issue, something that obviously the Jints has been working on, that you in particular have been leading our effort on? What do you finish us up?
Yeah. Okay, Mike. Let me just underscore, though, however, in terms of all these operational capabilities Israel is going to need and needs now, as important as they are, I can't understress how important the U.S. diplomatic role will be here in giving Israel the cover that it needs to do what, we all have to prepare ourselves for, is going to be likely a very awful conflict with horrific pictures of human suffering. But Israel, after what happened on Saturday, for all of our sakes, is going to have to drive home the message that this will never, ever happen again, and Hamas will never be capable of doing this again. So that kind of diplomatic cover in the United Nations, because we've all seen this movie before of how quickly that international support will evaporate and Israel's response to these kinds of atrocities will become the main issue. And the United States really has to steel itself diplomatically to give Israel the time and space, as well as the capabilities to do what it needs to do here. I would also just stress, we haven't had a chance to talk about it today. Hopefully we will. I personally believe that the Iranian and Hezbollah tentacles to this operation are very clear. I tend to agree with what the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday, that there has been a very high degree of operational support and planning and training that has gone on between these Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and the Iranians. And we do have to think both of what the implications, if the Iranians have green-lighted and supported this mission, if we find out that the intelligence really supports that, what is our posture going to be? What is it just in Hamas that they suffered the price? And is that enough to hurt the Iranian Hezbollah capabilities in the region? Or do we have to think more broadly about this? And clearly, I think, as you suggested earlier, the American posture, whatever we've done in the past, whatever we thought we were doing over the past several months in terms of a unspoken de-escalation campaign with the Iranians, by allowing them to export their oil, by returning billions and billions of dollars to them in terms of hostage ransom, that has only provided them with the space they need to escalate in other arenas against us and against our allies and partners. And in terms of the Iranian goal here, I have believed since the beginning that as they have watched over the past several months, this movement toward Israeli-Saudi rapprochement, that is really a dagger pointed at the heart of the Iranian-led resistance in the region, that it will shatter their ideological conception of being able to destroy the Jewish state, to have the only Jewish state and the most powerful Islamic and Arab state in the world declare open amity and peace and normalization between them. We cannot underestimate how lethal a blow and how much the Iranian and the Iranian-led resistance fears that outcome. And I have no doubt that all of this is, at least one of its chief goals, is to completely disrupt and derail that kind of American-Saudi-Israeli effort. And the United States really has to be able to keep a ball, and the president has to really now, I think, double down on figuring out how we not only salvage the Abraham Accords, but that normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Because as we heard when we were in Riyadh just last November, MBS perfectly knows well that as the closer they come to peace with Israel, the more the extremists and the enemies of peace and the Iranian-led resistance will do to try and disrupt that effort, because they know how dangerous it is to them. MBS fully expects this type of thing, and now he needs American support to really, pull up his capabilities here to resist this. And while their initial response, I think, was disappointing, I think he knows, and he will continue to know, that rapprochement, normalization with Israel is entirely in the Saudi national interest. And I think he needs all the support he can get right now to stay on that track and not allow himself to be diverted, and to give these terrorists in Hamas and Tehran and Beirut the kind of victory that they're looking for to disrupt normalization and Israel's entry into full permanence and legitimacy in the broader Arab and Islamic world.
Okay, well, thank you, John. I think that's an excellent topic. I want to talk more about the North. I think we should talk about the Palestinians. We don't have time now. We'll be doing another, obviously, every day there are new developments. I expect we'll be doing another webinar very, very soon. And as I say, General Aish, General Norkin, John, Anna, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mike Makovsky. I'm the president and CEO of GINSA, which I didn't mention at the beginning, but I wanted to get right to the substance of this discussion. I hope you found it educational. We appreciate all of you joining us today, and please stay tuned for our emails and announcements of our next webinar as we cover these very, very important, dramatic events, both for Israel and obviously for the United States. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
John, bye.